I am Games, and this is Alt-Tabbed, a video essay series where the video doesn't matter. Feel free to tab over to another site or app while listening, unless you don't want to, in which case, enjoy this uninterrupted game footage. It's current year, Twitter somehow still exists, and as a result, everybody has a problem with everything. And video games are given no quarter in the culture war updated in real time. Any problem you can shake a stick at has an associated hashtag, and video games are no stranger to hosting Twitter's trademark infighting. Journalists and gamers are seemingly perpetually at odds with each other, and studios are left to take sides in an attempt to balance promoting positive press with securing sales. Meanwhile, I'm over here like, guys, I just want to play fucking video games. Alas, though, throw a controversy in front of me enough times and the gray matter inevitably starts spinning up, and I found myself contemplating one of Twitter's more evergreen gaming controversies in light of a recent statement from Obsidian Studios igniting the topic all over again, the idea of the political game. Before we get too lost in the weeds, though, let's take a look at Obsidian's statement and the response therein to make sure you're all up to speed on what I'm even talking about, as it's a solid microcosm for the topic in general. Leonard Boyarsky, creative director at Obsidian, made a statement concerning the studio's newest title, The Outer Worlds, that the team was working hard to, quote, not make a hard, politically charged game, and to, quote, not lecture the player. This statement was immediately praised by gamers growing weary of their hobby being used as a spearhead for political commentary, but harshly criticized by other gamers more neutral to the concept, as well as parts of the gaming press, for coming off as hypocrisy. The narrative of The Outer Worlds revolves heavily around corrupt corporations and rampant capitalism, a topic that seems pretty politically charged, especially in today's social debate. I've been mulling over this concept continuously over the last week and change. As someone at the intersection of gamer, developer, and commentator, my hat was firmly secured in the center of this Venn diagram, and I could empathize with both perspectives as well as the plight of developers, to a degree. However, something seemed to be missing from the discussion that I couldn't quite place my finger on. So, against my better judgment, I went to work on hashing out exactly what about this entire concept as a whole sat with me so strangely. The result is this video. Games, like all art, can pull on real-world concepts in order to tell stories and make statements. Narrative is fertile ground for philosophical exercises, and video games are no stranger to hosting their fair share of potent thought experiments, examining all kinds of heavy subjects. They're arguably the medium best suited for the task, as the interactive nature means that you, the player, can be forced to not just read about the uncomfortable thing, or watch the uncomfortable thing, but to have to actually do the uncomfortable thing, and resonate with what the author is trying to communicate all that more effectively. Obsidian themselves are no stranger to this. One of their most critically acclaimed titles, referenced in the promotional material for The Outer Worlds, Fallout New Vegas, was essentially a massive examination of democracy, and its characters, factions, and plot lines all revolved around a nuanced, multifaceted perspective on its strengths and weaknesses, leaving the player to come to their own conclusions and finish the game in a multitude of different ways, leaving their mark on the world of New Vegas in whatever shade of gray they felt served the greatest good. It would be hard to argue that a game literally about politics isn't political. Yet, New Vegas, and similar games that lean hard on philosophical commentary, like BioShock for example, are fan favorites among the very people who tend to decry the so-called politics in gaming snafu. What's the disconnect here? What are these games doing to earn praise from both the press and players that more contemporary titles are missing that cause them to be so divisive? Like so many disagreements on social media, it seems to me like it's a problem stemming from a foundational difference of definition. Getting our terms clear and understanding what it is we're actually talking about is paramount to healthy debate, but it's so easy to lose track of in the wake of social media discourse happening in 200-character bytes at multiple tweets per minute. So, what exactly do we mean when we say a political game? Well, the most obvious answer would be a game talking about politics. New Vegas seems to fit the bill perfectly here, but then what about The Outer Worlds? That's not talking about government, it's talking about business, about corporatism. That can be regulated by politics, but it isn't politics directly. What about last year's controversy around Battlefield 5? Historical inaccuracies for having a protagonist with a futuristic cybernetic arm in World War II was billed as putting politics in games, but what does realism have to do with politics? Anyone plugged into these debates probably already knows where I'm going with this, but the term politics in this particular context is used as shorthand for any kind of socio-political commentary, or content decisions made in games on behalf of a developer's alleged appeal to politically correct sensibilities. Politics doesn't just mean politics. It means anything done as a reflection of, a commentary on, or consideration of real-world debate or real-world issues. And in a general sense, this definition can lead one to the conclusion that all art is political, as nothing exists in a vacuum. Every piece of media we interact with, as both creator and consumer, are influenced by our perceptions, understanding, and interpretations of the world around us. And if we choose to use the term politics as a catch-all for anything debated about in a public forum, and then consider the scope of social media, then yes, everything, including games, is political. But there's another dimension to this, I feel. A subtle differentiator that a certain part of the public picks up on and is actively pushing back against. I think for a lot of people, this idea of examining socio-political concepts as an interactive philosophical thought experiment, a la a Bioshock or a New Vegas, isn't what they're decrying when rallying to keep politics out of games. And I think this is also why statements like what Obsidian made for The Outer Worlds aren't necessarily hypocritical. These games are politically framed, but they aren't commenting on current events per se. They aren't making overt references to current talking points, nor are they including content specifically in response to real-life current socio-political pressures. They're philosophical exercises, not direct commentary. It's the difference between The Outer Worlds crafting a narrative for examining a complicated concept broadly, like corporatism, and using your game as an opinion column to weigh in on a current topical target like Amazon, and crafting an evil CEO character that paraphrases Jeff Bezos' talking points. Now, none of this is to say that games can't be soapboxes. Art should be free to be whatever the creator wants it to be. The goal here for me is to try and identify this subtle difference of definition between the two camps that so often make it sound like people are talking past each other on Twitter. I think another important decision is that when it comes to socio-political concepts, no matter how convinced one might be of the virtue of their position, there's always a counterpoint. Social media has enabled a dialogue that consists of hot takes, cancel culture, and insular thinking. But the fact of the matter is, most people who disagree with someone don't do so because they're evil, but merely because they have different priorities. New Vegas was a politically charged game that dodged criticism not only because it examined its themes in its own fictional sandbox version of the US, rather than blatantly referencing 2010 political talking points, but that even when discussing something as sensitive as democracy as a whole, it never took a moral absolute stance. It presented its ideas from multiple perspectives, even if people would find those perspectives distasteful, and let each player parse all the perspectives they were willing to listen and give credit to, and come to their own conclusions. Having a game lecture a player on what they should think is far more limiting than a game that instead asks the player to think. Now, of course, this isn't to say that games can't take a moral stance on issues. Most media tends to communicate themes of some sort. The reason that every piece of art isn't as divisive as quote-unquote political games is that most themes in media are pretty uncontentious. Good versus evil isn't really going to raise any eyebrows. But moving it to more heady territory, like an examination of capitalism or democracy, and now you're moving into issues that are nuanced. And while that's fine, developers who choose to take a hardline stance on a contentious issue are now risking the alienation of part of the public that falls on the other side of the debate. This is where New Vegas benefits from presenting all sides of the issue, or something like Bioshock using the fictional location of Rapture as a playground for their ideas, to disarm people who may otherwise push back against the concepts if presented in a more contemporary setting. The original Star Trek also used this to fantastic effect in the 60s, obfuscating otherwise blatant social commentary through the use of science fiction allegories. It disarmed people who might have carried biases the show disagreed with by presenting the same concepts through a less blatant lens, allowing them to view the issue more objectively via less familiar iconography. And probably also get past the primetime censors. On the other side of the fence is a game like Wolfenstein II, The New Colossus. Machine Games choosing here to use much more direct political commentary, which seemed almost mandatory considering the subject matter of the game, combined with the time of its release. By using language in the game that was analogous to current hot-button phrases, layering in comments that invoke current political concepts like white privilege and the progressive stack, prominent in the 2017 social debate, and running advertisements for the game with the tagline "Punch a Nazi" during the height of the Richard Spencer debacle, it was leveraging real-world events to actively comment on them throughout the game. It was no longer operating in a philosophical thought bubble. It chose to break out of that and be vocal about what was going on today specifically. Now, granted, this isn't the greatest example to trot out considering that Punch a Nazi is far less contentious of a social debate than is democracy good or bad, but even still, there was a fair bit of discussion around the notion of if cold-cocking someone merely speaking on the sidewalk, no matter how distasteful, is morally justified. It was, to a lot of people, a freedom of speech issue. By tying your game to one side of the debate, even if loosely so, you naturally will get blowback from the other side. The point here is that some people just don't like media trying to be their mom. They didn't sign up for a lecture. And while the developer might not see their stance as such, nor the people who agree with the messaging, since it just feels to them as a reinforcement of the truth, other people won't agree, and they have access to Twitter just like everyone else. This isn't me saying don't talk about contentious things in games. Far from it. Rather, I'm saying don't be surprised if talking about contentious things in games ends up being contentious. So, after all of that, what is a political game? Well, I think it depends on who you ask. To somebody pro the concept, it's essentially every game. Anything that talks about any subject that is relevant to the real world is making a political statement whether it wants to or not. Are you Obsidian talking about corporatism? You're being political. Are you Ubisoft and claiming you don't want to be political while simultaneously having your entire E3 lineup full of Tom Clancy political thrillers? Tough luck, you're still being political. If you can point to something that resembles a real-world issue, you're courting with politics. On the other hand, though, you have people who would probably concede those to be political ideas, but they don't necessarily have to be carrying current political weight. Terrorists can just be a framing device for shootouts in Washington. Evil corporations can just be mustache-twirling bad guys the hero has to struggle against. And even if a studio wants to go more in depth and examine capitalism or democracy, that's fine, and arguably not the politics that these people don't want to see in games. That's philosophy, a sandbox experiment combined to a fictional allegory of reality, where concepts can be tested in a way beyond how they've been explored in real-world history without the real-world consequences, where developers can weigh in on complex subject matters, or, even more, ask the player to experience these subjects head-on and weigh in on the issues themselves through their actions. This isn't the kind of politics that are contentious. Media has been doing this kind of thing for as long as media has been a thing. Instead, it's when real life is brought into the equation, when the illusion of the game world is compromised by injecting stark real-world opinions into an otherwise fictional experience. To those in agreement with these opinions, this can be a moment of catharsis, seeing the creators echoing your sentiment. To those in the opposition, though, it can be an unwelcome shattering of immersion. This isn't wrong, though, and gamers don't have the right to tell studios what they can and cannot say in their games. They do have the right to be upset about it, though. In closing, I think political games would be better referred to as social commentary games, to better bring a baseline to the discussion, and perhaps curb some of the talking past each other Twitter is so famous for. Who am I kidding? That's never gonna happen. Woo! So you made it to the end of the video without leaving a spicy comment. I would be pretty hypocritical if I was expecting this video to go over incredibly smoothly and not expecting people to get, rather heated about it and have a nice compact simulation of Twitter discourse going on in the comments below. It is a political video after all, so I'm sure the political commentary will ensue. I brought it upon myself. I did my best with this video not to try and take a side in this debate. While I do have personal feelings about the idea of political games, the point of this video wasn't really to express what I thought about politics in games, but what I thought about the meta discussion around politics in games. I did my best to be as objective as possible, but I'm sure things slipped in here and there because none of us are perfect. I threw my script out to my patrons and a couple of my friends who I trust who are good at writing to make sure that it sounded at least passable enough that it wasn't going to blow up in the wrong way in my face. So hopefully I did a decent job. Hopefully the like to dislike ratio is sitting at around 60 to 70%, but who knows. In addition to working on this channel, I'm also making a game of my own, which you can check the demo out over on Newgrounds. If you like the videos or the game, I'd love if you could throw me $1 a month over on Patreon so I can keep the videos coming a couple times a week and spend as much time as possible continuing to develop the game and learn more 3D animation and programming. And if you donate $5 a month, you get access to weekly bonus podcasts just like this video that I do just for patrons. That's all I got for now. Until next time, remember to be the games you want to see. I am Games, signing out.